Cynthia? Hi, I think you're both muted.
There we go. How are you?
Good, how are you? Sorry
I'm
about the
good,
Zoom
thank you.
link.
That's okay.
Cynthia, are you there?
There she is.
Geez, Louise. Okay.
Okay, I've made you both co-hosts, so you should be able to share.
Okay.
David, I'm doing mine, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And then I was just going to introduce you two with the bios you sent.
Sure.
Does that sound good?
And then how long would you like it to be for? And what's the format?
You guys to both talk. They've been running an hour, I think. And then time for questions at the end. Does that work for you? And I'm going to tell everyone to just put their questions in the chat or wait till the end to ask, and I'll help moderate that.
And I guess maybe if there aren't questions or there's not a large showing, then maybe you just, we don't want to have any awkwardness.
Yeah, I'll either come up with something to ask or just finish it up and,
Okay.
and tell people to look out for our next book art series.
Okay.
All right. So David, how does this look right here, or anybody looking at it?
It looks fine. It's clear.
I see it. It looks great. And it's David Charles
Chioffi.
Chioffi.
Chioffi, the diphthong.
Okay. All right. I am going to go ahead and admit everyone.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Recording. Hey, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first 2023 book art series. We are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Annika Schneider and I will be moderating. I will first introduce our two speakers and then they will go ahead and present. If you have any questions, please either put them in the chat, direct message to me or to everyone, and I will track those during the presentations. And then we will have time to answer them at the end, and then you can also answer questions at the end. Okay, so it is my pleasure to introduce David Charles Chioffi, who is a professor of graphic design within the School of Art of the J. William Fulbright College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Previously, he was an associate professor and head of the Department of Design and chair of the Division of Design Arts at Memphis College of Art in Memphis, Tennessee. A native New Englander, he completed his undergraduate degree at the Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York, and received his graduate degree from Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. In addition to his traditional and experimental design practice, he is also the co-founder of the Modality Project Design. Professor Chioffi's prior posts include Executive Vice President of Design and Communications at the Hospice Institute for Education, Training and Research in Branford, Connecticut, and Associate Director of Packaging Design and Visual Identities, Polo Ralph Lauren Corporation in New York City. Cynthia Nourse Thompson is currently Associate Professor and Director of Curatorial Affairs at the Zuckerman Museum of Art in Kennesaw State University. Prior to this position, for 6 years, she was Associate Professor and Director of the Graduate Program in Book Arts and Printmaking at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She has also served as Associate Professor and Curator of Exhibitions at University of Arkansas, 12 years as Professor of Book, Print, and Paper Arts and Chair of Fine Arts at Memphis College of Art, and additionally worked at Dieudonné Paper Mill, Harlan and Weaver Intaglio, and Rutgers Center for Innovative Print and Paper. Thompson has been awarded numerous residencies, including Yaddo, Columbia College Chicago Center for Book and Paper Arts, Women's Studio Workshop, the Visual Studies Workshop, Minnesota Center for Book Arts, and a Maker Creator Fellowship at the Winter Museum, Garden, and Library. Thank you both for being here today, and I will hand it over to the two of you.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Annika. It's nice to be here, particularly with Cynthia, because she was one of the founding members of this organization. And I also had the enjoyment of producing your conference catalog when Cynthia hosted it in Philadelphia. So it's nice to almost return home with that happening.
Great. So David, where do you want to start off? We are the project that we are going to talk about today is being reduced. And one of the reasons for that is because of COVID. Like everyone, we our calendars, our project dates, all of that was forced to be reevaluated and readjusted because of COVID. So a number of years ago, David and I started collaborating together on artist books and also on prints. And we're still working on a press name, which we hope to come up with very soon. But we had been awarded several fellowships. And the first one we're going to talk about is at Winter Tour Garden, Museum, and Library. And it was a Maker Creator Fellowship. And David, maybe you want to talk a little bit about exactly what we were seeking to study when we were there.
Sure.
Well, I'm showing images, and these are some of the images of the grounds, which we also had access to.
I think what's unique about this particular residency, and something that Cynthia and I were not totally accustomed to, was the fact that there were no facilities. So it was purely research. And here we see a 17th century depiction of a cabinet of curiosities. And I think we're somewhat known now for working with collections and exploring how they influence our collaborative processes. Winter Tour was 1,000 acres and natural acres. It was the former home of DuPont, and it occupied 9 floors. And it was a collection, and I will say it looked very much like what you're seeing on the screen now.
And we'll feature some of the images from the
Right,
home, which we had access to, and we had access to the archives in the library 24/7, which was really wonderful.
I think to be connected to Decorative Arts Museum provided us with a wealth of ideation. So we're very interested in this concept of the taxonomy, and Continental, a play on the words because it's through different geographies. But we're developing this taxonomy, and the way we're looking at it is as a language. Here you can see Cynthia is looking at mourning jewelry, and this was a salesman's case for purchasers in the home to buy mementos or have them created of their recently lost loved ones.
Departed ones. Yeah, and these are examples of the different designs that you could have created. And this was the conservation lab. So we also received wonderful access there with the projects they were currently working on. And so here's another shot of the exquisite examples that they had. And this tied into the current exhibition that I was curating at the museum titled This Mortal Coil, which was dealing with mortality, loss, anguish, and in considering all of the suffering collaboratively, and globally that we've all been through over the past 3 years. So really, I think my artistic work and practice and my curatorial practice really came together in this fellowship. And also with David, because he in fact designed the catalog for the exhibition, which we'll talk about in a minute and show examples of, which was really much more of an artist book than just a documentation of the exhibition. And then these are some of the examples of the actual mourning jewelry that we, came to study. And the image you see in the center is of Martha Washington and George Washington's hair braided together in this mourning brooch. We also were able to study and look at textiles. So some of the imagery you're seeing here with this sort of iconic mourning culture, iconography. We have the weeping willow, we have the urn, we have the woman, standing at the plinth with the urn. And this is all done in embroidery. It's a very large piece. This was just a detail. And this is David and I also in the conservation lab where they were restoring this gorgeous tapestry.
And we didn't have to look far to find specimens that we saw in the tapestries. We could walk by them in the vast gardens. So that's really what had us developing a language.
Mm-hmm. And this is just an example of a mourning sampler textiles that was created. In addition to, and David, I'll let you speak.
Sure.
The house museum with all of these wonderful artifacts and objects and collections. We also had access to the archives. And so we became very interested in ephemera, which also played into the exhibition catalog. So here you have these, mourning cards or announcements that went out that had the initials or edged with the black edging as a noter of mourning.
Those are, I think, something that we don't see nowadays. The edging, the width of the band is at its widest immediately after the death, and as it progresses within the appropriate amount of time mandated by the Victorians, mostly for this, it becomes thinner and thinner. So seeing these, but also reading them is what took us to heart, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, at one point, the Special Collections librarian brought out a box of massive boxes of index cards, and it was someone's job to catalog and list on each index card every item that went in every coffin with the individuals that had passed away. And just reading those and handwritten, text was just really moving. So this whole time we were at the museum, we were sort of immersed in all of this, I wouldn't say darkness, but, dealing with mortality, death, mourning, and really thinking about how that related to, our current circumstances in the exhibition that we were working on. Again, as David mentioned, one of the interesting things about this fellowship was that we didn't have a studio. And so we were just given a very large room, and we spent a lot of time just in the library researching. And what we initially went there to study, we did, but we also fell down a rabbit hole, another rabbit hole, and started a completely separate project that we're still working on now, which was really exciting in viewing the, do you want to briefly talk about that, David, the Hamilton prints?
Sir William Hamilton was envoy consulate for Naples, and he was a patron of the arts, particularly his own arts, and brought a familiarity to people in the etchings that were done of Greek and Etruscan pottery. And they're in huge volumes. There are 4 of them. You can barely lift them. And I had come across those earlier. About 2 years ago, I had bought some prints from that were at auction. But when we were able to see the actual formats, it really started to have us think of what is the cadence of this type of language. Interesting about this, though, is Hamilton's representations were what Josiah Wedgwood used to create his porcelains. So
and Winterthur had a collection of Wedgwood also, and of course the portraits, the reliefs along those urns, which also to us related to funerary urns, again had these iconic relief, sculptural images of the urn, the weeping willows, the mourner. So that's also come into play in our current project. At the same time, we were, at Winterthur, we were going into New York City to do some further research at the Easton Foundation and Louise Bourgeois Archive. The exhibition that I curated also featured a print by Louise, and then also in the museum, I curated a solo exhibition of all works in textiles and prints by Louise Bourgeois relating to mourning, loss, labor, and remembrance. And so we spent a lot of time at the Easton Foundation, which I'll show, which was also Louise's home, but also Harlan and Weaver were are Intelio publishers that I used to work for when I was in New York City. And this is Felix Harlan picture here. Carol passed away several years ago, sadly, but they worked with Louise for over 20 years. And they have an incredible amount of works by Louise. And she was a prolific artist in a sense that she really mined her imagery and pushed it very far. So here you see this kind of iconic image that she's known for, which is the spider and the mother as the spider. And this print has been printed on paper as well as linens and handkerchiefs that you see here. And of course, the handkerchief is especially to me, associated with sorrow or mourning. And so it was really wonderful to visit the shop again and speak with Felix. Here, David and I are in the Easton Foundation, which is the archive, and you can see these massive notebooks in front of us, and we had access to all of Louise's writings. And at that time, in that summer, she had a monumental exhibition on view at the Jewish Museum, which featured her sculptural works as well as facsimiles of her diary entries. And so it was wonderful to be there that summer to see that exhibition, but then we had the real thing in front of us. And we spent hours going through these notebooks, reading all of her really poignant and really heavy emotional anxiety, sorrow, and anger-driven entries. And many of these, I believe Maggie is still, hiring interns to come in to translate, because not all of them have been translated. Many of them, are written in French. Louise was French, but it was just a wonderful opportunity to dive deep into, the psyche of this woman that had so much sorrow and anguish that she carried around throughout her life, which, made its way through her writing as well as her artwork. And this is an image of us. There's a mini spider in the backyard of the foundation. And you can see the foundation is this wonderful row house in Chelsea. And Louise's home is exactly mirrored on the other side of this. And they broke through one of the walls in the basement. So when you enter, underneath, you can come into the home. And I'll have to say, these are images that are available on the internet. We were not allowed to show any of the photographs that we took when we were there. The home is going to become open to the public very soon, but they are still working on archiving all the materials and also developing facsimiles of everything. But this is an image of Louise's bedroom, which was just so wonderful to see, especially as a printmaker and having worked for Felix and Carol. You know, I noticed so many patterns and colors and imagery that related to her prints. Like here on the left, we see this beautiful, you know, just blue and white and red towel, and then her bedspread. And she did a number of prints with the bed and bed form with the same colors. I have to say, it was noted that when her husband passed away, she never slept in this bedroom again, and she moved into this little cot-like bed directly under all of her sketchbooks and writings that she collected. And it was just very humble. And these are some images, again, off of the internet. Everything was left as is. So this was a mantle in her apartment. And you can see right here, one of her Yves Saint Laurent lipsticks that she was known for, which appeared on the mantle. And then as you walk up the 5-story brownstone, there's this wonderful oculus at the top with a skylight. And David and I utilized that in the catalog. So the color blue appears quite often in the exhibition catalog, which again, to me, reads as an artist's book, along with many of her quotes that we were allowed to use that included the word blue or the color blue or referred to that.
Cynthia, what was your impression when you would go there?
Well, it was wonderful just because everything was left as is. You know, she has this jar of, if you remember, the blue colored, you know, candy coated almonds right when you walk in. Her handwriting.
The Jordan almonds.
Yeah, the Jordan almonds, her handwriting and notes still left up on, you know, blackboard as you enter. I mean, I have a particular relationship because when I worked for Carol and Felix, I would often be sent over to Louise's home, not to monitor the Sunday salons, which a lot of the interns or people who worked there did, but her roof would leak. And so I would empty buckets of rainwater, you know, on the days when, you know, it was raining. But yeah, it was just wonderful to enter, and especially in the basement, because her little press where she would run the proofs was still there. In the room where she held the salons, her table was still stained red from where she would do ink drawings or ink up the plates and wipe them down, because Felix would often bring the plates over and they would do a lot of proofing in her basement studio. So yeah. So David, do you want to talk about this? So
we have I've been fortunate to collaborate on a few projects with Cynthia, and I think we're starting to be a well choreographed ballet. At times I stumble over my 2 feet or my words, but we're able to seek out each of our best attributes, and being able to work with someone who's an artist but also who's a curator has expanded how I perceive the two-dimensional world to be drafted upon. And this was the iconic figure of Hamilton.
Oh, can I interrupt real quick?
Sure.
Because I have to say also that I have a certain aesthetic to my imagery and my work. And the thing that I've learned from David is I become much more open to working with text and typography, as he is a type designer. And so that's one of the things that I think we, you know, both complement each other on, as well as our backgrounds, which we'll talk in a minute. But you want to continue with Ophelia?
So this Malaise image of Ophelia really became the starting point for this catalog artist book. And we drew our palette from this. Now, this is a page from the catalog. You can see the gold framed image from the Tate on the upper left. You can see the oculus on the upper right. And then if you go all the way across, you start to see these bands. And what I did was develop an algorithm in which it would extract numerics representing the different colors that were available in that particular piece of art. And that became a data collection point, and we were able to chart what did sorrow look like, and what did sorrow look like outside of the Victorian perception of that time. So here you can see Rosemary Lang, and in the catalog we see the isolated image. Then we see a full bleed image. And then here the algorithm on the left and right. So those are all the colors out of 24 data points that were collected from Rosemary Lang's piece. In the center is the gutter, and it's the abstraction pixelated of Ophelia. But as you turn the page, you can see just a little bit of it coming up from the spine. And I thought that was a way in which to try to pierce through this vast, it's over 300 pages, the catalog. And the last thing here is we see on the right side, it says prime, which is the isolated image, focal, which is the bleed image, as well as where it lives in relation to all the other works. So,
sorry, something just happened.
Yeah.
There we go, sorry.
There we go. So this being able to chart where these images lived, based on the curation of Cynthia, was another way in which we were starting to leave breadcrumbs, I think, because we wanted to go back and reconsider how data, particularly data of this type, can be utilized in a speculative manner of design.
And it was done for each work of art. And what was really beautiful, as David mentioned, was where you see the bands of sort of, the percentages or the reckoning with the mourning was apparent on the foredge. And it became really interesting as a marker within the structure of the book.
Yeah.
Hang on. So, and this is just one of the installation shots from the piece. Then David and I were invited to be academic researchers and printers in residence at the Bodleian Bibliographical Press in Oxford. And that was also a residency that was to align with and take place, right after winter tour. However, because of COVID, we had to work with Alexandra for a while in establishing a date. And so this fellowship didn't happen until the following summer, which allowed David and I to complete, the catalog for the exhibition, and also prep for this, fellowship based on a lot of the imagery and things that we had collected from winter tour. And so this is, just a really lovely shot of the campus. And this was the view from the press, which we just couldn't get enough of. It was so gorgeous. And every time of day, the light would change. It was just really wonderful.
That's what I remember, that the light being, it was like a Turner painting. It just, you didn't know what to do, but you didn't want to look away. You had to absorb it. And that later part of the afternoon always was a wonderful time to experience the architecture. That building before was the Christopher Wren designed. Here we are on the top of the library.
Weston Library.
Yep.
Yeah, so while we were there, we had access to numerous libraries across campus, including special collections. We also had gatherings with other scholars that were there, which was really wonderful because each had a particular area of research or interest. And I think that we learned a lot from this.
It was a Friday meet and greet, and a new acquisition would be presented.
Yeah, and so this, I believe,
this is a prayer book, I think.
Yeah, this is when we were introduced to the indulgences.
Indulgences, yeah.
And
so that what one needs to do in order to acquire absolution and salvation. For a while, the Catholic Church wasn't using them because they became a bit of a corrupted entity because people would try to buy indulgences. So even that made it more intriguing to us.
Yeah, this is our little doorway into the press. So the library, forms this large kind of square rectangle, and the courtyard is in the center. And it's an active working library. But if any of you have been there before, you'll know that hundreds of tour groups come through, and they're often very, very loud. We did have full access to the areas and the study areas in the library, which the public doesn't have access to, which is where some of the famous Harry Potter scenes were filmed.
That's what it was so funny, because the tourists they wanted to digest every bit of the environment, and people would just check doors. They'd be going, you can hear click, click, and if it opens,
you'll try to open
walk in, and they would be like, oh, can we come in here? And we're like, and this was where we would be working, but we regrettably did not take the Harry Potter tour at Oxford, but
that's okay.
I could have bought a cane and I could have bought a hat. So that was interesting.
And so here we are, we had numerous presses we could work with. Here we're looking at their the different specimens they had. And of course the fell, I don't know if you want to talk, David, about the fell types. We could talk about that in a minute, but wonderful wood type collection, working on the press. But we were fortunate because that summer they were renovating another library, and the librarian from that library was working on developing this sort of fab lab. And so they had a 3D printer. So David and I started designing our own ornament based on, again, a lot of the materials that we had studied and collected from Winter Tour, but also in particular from a lot of the devotional texts and manuscripts, and looking at the different typographical matrices. And so it was kind of wonderful to be able to create these forms as a start for what we're working with this sort of thistle imagery.
And
this was many times our office, which was the outdoor area to the Weston Library, where we'd have coffee in the mornings. And it was just, again, really nice. The light is just so beautiful. What were you going to say, David?
I was going to say that Bishop John Fell was stationed at Oxford, and he's attributed with being the person who brought movable type to the United Kingdom. So 17th century, he and a punch cutter from the Netherlands brought a very kind of clunky cast letters, which then develop into the Fell typefaces. There were huge tomes written about it. One in the 1840s was actually printed at one of the presses that we showed in that room. We were able to see the original punches when
which I'll show.
Research at Oxford University Press, and Bishop Fell was the one who established Oxford University Press.
So you saw I kind of was just showing some of the natural imagery that surrounded us. We made efforts going to lots of gardens while we were there. And particularly studying all these different specimens of thistles, which are coming into play into the typeface we're designing, as well as the ornaments. We also made special trips. We rented a car and went out to Kelmscott Manor, which was really wonderful, because again, we really wanted to absorb all the typography, all the pattern, all of that surrounding us, while we were there. And so here is Oxford University Press, which we also had access to. And so David and I spent a lot of time there as well, and wonderful librarians who had not opened the vault.
Yeah, I think it was 5 years, she said. Yeah,
I thought it was longer than that, but these are the original punches for the type specimens.
We were starstruck. I mean, it was quite something to.
This is the vault.
It's in this huge Victorian vault, and the depth to which the different cuts were accomplished is quite amazing.
Amazing.
So we were intrigued by the way in which this was the expansion, and I would say probably the non-traditional flowers and ligatures which occupied this very, very large family. We also were able to see his church, which was Christ Church, one of the larger ones in Oxford, and this is from their museum.
Yeah. And the coronation. Actually, we also spent a lot of time, which we'll talk about, in London as well. We went to St. Bride and visited their press as well. But in Oxford, we made use of everything. And so here's the Natural History Museum, which to me, I mean, the architectural is so gorgeous. It reads like a cathedral. Attached to that is the Pitt Rivers Museum, which is one of my favorite places in the world because I love to collect things and odd things. You can see my doll head collection back here.
And it's categorized though, that's what I found interesting with that. It's categorized not by chronology.
Years or chronology.
It's by the interconnectivity.
Well, so, also the taxonomies, you could say.
Right,
so down here were all shrunken heads. Over here was any kind of writing tool ever used, within history. And they also had a really wonderful mourning jewelry collection that was on display. But because we were visiting scholars, we were allowed access to the archive. And so the special collections there, had us in the special collections area, and we got to view extra imagery and objects that weren't on view at the time, which was really special.
Go back. What I remember about this was something that struck our interest at Winterthur, the George and Martha intertwined hair. To see the actual brooch was impactful, but to see when the brooch was taken out, and they were all in these elaborate cases, very much like this, but to see the absence or the impression or the marks that were made brought us back to what we ended up working with in the Currier and Ives images. So this was quite something to see here as well.
Yeah. And of course, Milagros and anything associated, I love these. In many sections of the museum, there were just, flat files, and you could open them and there was much more of the collection. It was just extremely expansive and I loved it. We also, as mentioned, went into London quite a bit. So we made visits to the British Library, which since the last time I'd been in London, Mark, who was head of conservation, their conservation lab was being moved and reconstructed. But these are the stacks. They also featured wonderful exhibitions from their permanent collection, as well as a special show that dealt with gold and illumination. And I was actually able to take an historic illumination class with one of the most prominent illuminators in the UK, which was also a wonderful experience. So here you can see all of this type of ornament that we were specifically interested in, and its relationship to the designs that we're developing, working with these thistle forms. We also got our reader's card for the V&A, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and made specific requests there. So here we are in special collections, again, looking at illuminated manuscripts, Book of Hours. And so I don't have images of St. Bride, but it was a really incredible experience.
Well, we saw the actual sampler that Caslon printed, and you've seen it reproduced so many times, but to actually have someone bring it out to you to look at it, that was, it brought the history alive a bit to me. I guess I'll say that.
Mm-hmm. And so here's where David and I are currently.
We're not currently there.
Well, currently with our project.
Right.
We were recently awarded a winter residency at Penland in the papermaking studio. So again, we've been talking about all this research we've been doing. We were able to print and dabble with creating ornaments and portions of our typeface that we're working with in 3D printing. And we've been staying in constant contact since the summer and developing imagery and ornament to work with for this residency, because now we had the opportunity to actually make, right, and see some of these things come through in the techniques that we are planning to incorporate in the artist's book. So we were at Penland for 2 weeks. While we were there, it snowed. It's really wonderful. If you haven't been to Penland, it's a beautiful, incredible place. I've taught there for a number of years. And I was fortunate to teach several summers ago in the new studio. So these are the new papermaking, photography, and gallery spaces at Penland. The paper studio is wonderful. It's outfitted really beautifully. This was a section in our studio area we set up again for inspiration and some of the things that we have been working with since we're at winter tour. So we have this sort of nod here to the Wedgwood, to the figures, and also to the Hamilton prints. Here, the ornament and working with the thistle forms. And these are some of the tests that and taxonomy that we started developing, some of the hand-painted imagery that related. And then here, I didn't have an image of it, but, you know, when we were at winter tour, we became really enamored with the Courier and Ives lithographs. And so we started, I started hand painting and working with this imagery of the weeping willows and this sort of dark fashion in which they conveyed it, which was very much aligned to all of these kind of natural, like nature images that we saw throughout the house at winter tour. So here we are in the studio. And so David was incredible at designing a lot of these things and having them cut out on our plotter that we brought with us. And, you know, having been a paper maker for over 25 years, a long time. I used to work at Dudonay, as Annika mentioned. So here I'm working with a blowout technique. David and I also chose a specific color to work with as a base sheet based off the Wedgwood. I don't know if you want to talk about it. Yeah, a jasper, yeah. And also because it's not one that's typically known. I think when one thinks of the jasperware, you think of that beautiful blue
and black.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so for me, because my work deals a lot with the body, I felt that this flesh colored paper and base worked really well. So we set up in the back area of the studio. There were only three other residents there when we were there. We were the only ones working large, and also that really had, I would say, a formulative plan of what we wanted to accomplish. And so it was, 12, 14-hour days in the studio.
I don't know how you do, like, I'm still tired. Like,
well, I got
yeah.
carpal tunnel really bad, but
I respect all these paper makers.
Yeah, but here we are. So again, playing with these images that we're going to be incorporating. So because it was a wonderful time to spend, up to 14, 15 hours a day in a studio that's, superbly equipped. And Beth, who's the studio assistant there, is phenomenal. We knew that we weren't going to say complete, a dummy structure, walk out with a completed book. But what we wanted to utilize the time for was to work out what we've been saying is a taxonomy, so that we can come away with essentially like a cataloging of different ways of creating these images through these different paper making techniques, so that when we walk away, like the previous wall I showed you, we would have an entire, 8-foot by 4-foot wall of examples of the weeping willows as a blowout, as a watermark, as an excavated blowout, as a pulp painting, which and here as a pulp printing. So not sure how familiar everyone is with hand paper making, but there is a technique where you can print with pulp utilizing the imagery that you have exposed on a silk screen. It's a certain type of mesh count that you use. And then you can also develop these beautiful, very sophisticated layering and opacity. So here on the left is where I have gone back in and utilized a watercolor pencil, which is a unique technique working through the mesh. Here we have pulp painting, pulp printing, and then a blowout that's couched on top. So again, really working with this idea of opacity, transparency, layers, as well as watermarks, because David and I are very interested in the book how we can utilize the front and back of each page, and the watermark is very different on both of those, as well as the idea of a subtext. So you have maybe prominent text or prominent imagery that is layered on top of the sheet, but then there's a text or a narrative created by text as well as images that is within the sheet. And that's the wonderful thing about a watermark, because it's visible, but it's also invisible. And so we were playing around with a lot of these techniques and a lot of fibers, which, you know, currently we have a papermaking studio at Kennesaw. It's not as big as this. And this studio is just so well equipped. So it was a wonderful time for us to work out all of these things in advance. So here's watermarking and work very large, which I like to do, because the book we're working on is not going to be, you know, very tiny like the book of hours you saw us looking at. And so here's just some imagery right now that David and I have collaborated on. He is working to create these like ornament images. These are some of the examples that we came out with. Here are the weeping willows, and these are kind of direct in reflection to the ones in the Courier and Ives. And to me, they kind of read more like Spanish moss, just because I've been, you know, grew up in the South. But and here we're working on a black sheet. So one of our books we're working on is going to be black and have more of black on black, and then these other areas that are flipped. So there's this whole idea of shadow, silhouette, darkness, above and beneath, what follows you. And here David is pulp printing.
This was a day in which you can see my
your hair,
my hipster cap. But then it became suddenly very warm, and sadly, Cynthia got stung by a hornet.
Oh yeah, so we went from snow
to hornets.
Yeah.
But these are just so beautiful, and I can still see where they were in the landscape of Winterthur.
Yeah, and more. And it was really also wonderful because David, you know, and I team taught together at Memphis College of Art and at University of Arkansas. And it was primarily a book art course with graphic design students and visual art students. So from that, again, he gained and really broadened his vocabulary through these techniques that he learned through me, which was really wonderful. And so this brought us together in a studio where we were actually able to finally work together. And so here I am with this screen, working with the color pencils to highlight specific areas. Here David is pulling the
screen
substrate back. Yeah.
I'm still very shy with all this.
Oh, but wonderful. He had us very organized in the studio, as you can see, because, you know, a paper studio can get very messy, but we produced a lot. And then here's the imagery, which I know he's very enamored with the wet sheet and the results. But there's something so beautiful, again, with the pulp printing and then bringing the colored pencil in specific areas to highlight. And so right now what I'm doing is silkscreen printing on top of these. So you have, again, these layers, because silkscreen, the wonderful thing is the opacity that you can get, that heavy layer of ink. You can have very detailed and transparent, very loose effects as well, but to have that very graphic, you know, imagery come through on top of this is what's so beautiful. And so this is where, you know, perfect. We have time for questions. So this is where I ended with this shot, because I know, David, you're very enamored with this part of our project. It did take, as with anything, a lot of practice, right? Working with the different materials. There were days that weren't so good, as we printers say, you know, the printer's devil is here. Well, there's also a devil in the papermaking studio as well. But for the most part, we came out with an incredible amount of work to be cataloged and now, you know, put together for our book and then we're going to be in production mode. The drawing systems at Penland are huge, and I can't believe how many times we filled one that was almost as tall as I was. So it was a really incredibly productive experience.
And what's interesting about these ornaments is that people ask if they're attributed to William Morris. They're not. They're attributed to Augustus Welby Pugin, who was an architect, a Catholic, and designed the interiors of the House of Commons. So it's a slightly different way of utilizing figures that are natural. I am enamored by the pigment on the wet sheet. And as I know, it's not a way in which traditional papermaking would be. We were talking about, well, what would speculative paper be? Does the finished product have to be what is dried, or can it be archived or captured in a digital sense or in a photographic sense? So using process to make process. So that was how I consider the production methods of what we did. We approached it very much like a science project, and we had our log books, and we took good notes, and now we're able to go back and say what worked, what were our mistakes, and how can we make something better. But in a lot of times, in the absence of technique or process, some wonderful unexpected accidents happened. So yeah, I have to remember too.
Yeah, I mean, and we have to remember also, I mean, one of the things that I have somewhat been struggling with also is when I left University of the Arts, my position here is wonderful. I love curating. I love still, teaching print and paper workshops, but I do work full time. And so, I don't have the freedoms of full summers anymore. And so, that has been, I think, one of the hurdles with David and I working together, and he's been wonderfully malleable in that sense. Although he's busy also as a full professor, but, making the time to work on something that is, as in depth as we want to go with this project, and based on all of, our research and the places we visited, and also taking into account the catalog, which we didn't even show portions from the bourgeois part of the exhibition, which is just so beautiful, and its typography and design, and also the blue, which changes throughout the book according to the documenting of the shadows from the exhibition. We painted one of the walls, the exact color of the blue paint chip of Louise.
Well, we didn't say exact, we said approximate.
Well, yeah, Mackie gave us the paint chip. Yeah. And so there's this sense of time passing of, dawn to dusk. Again, and with the exhibition, the way it was installed, there's a narrative of the depletion of color as you walk through the galleries. So all of those types of things are, what we're kind of are seeping into the work. And so I think those things happen over time. Also, reminds me, it's very similar when I teach in Italy and I take my students over, and, a lot of that experience is, dabbling in the print studio, creating things here and there. But then the amazement is how those things and the visits and what they saw have an impact on their work, and how that comes out much later than at that exact moment when they're there. And many times they don't even see that. So, I have to kind of honor that way of making and learning. And it's very different, I think, for us, because now it's kind of flipped, so I have to think of myself as a student in a way and not necessarily rush things. So I think that's a good way to kind of talk about it.
I agree.
But yeah. Anyway, so that's our presentation. I think we have a little time for questions if there are any, or comments.
Yeah, thank you. What amazing access opportunities. And I am definitely with David. I did not know about pulp printing, and I'm going to look into that more. They're amazing. We have one We have one question from Karen in the chat. Have either of you read Susan Sontag's The Volcano Lover? Amazing novel about collections, collectors,
Oh, including Hamilton. Oh, wow.
Hey, Karen, how are you? I hope she's well. No, I haven't. And I love Susan Sontag, but no, I have not read that one.
It's one of the few books that I've read at least 3 times. It's an amazing novel, and there's always an undercurrent about talking about the meaning of collections and collectors and why, and the craziness of it. But it's a wonderful book. So
that's great.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I love that.
welcome.
Oh, thank you, Ruth. Yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed it. I mean, we hope to have finished product soon, the dummy structure, all of that coming along. Yeah, we'll hopefully enter.
You know what it was for me, Cynthia, just like a current mind body experience, was that it's the first time I've actually seen and heard you and I discuss from Winter there full circle through Penland, and these presentations seem like a sprint, but there's so much to try to get in. But I think I can see like the methodologies coming into play, and that for me is rewarding. So
the catalog is done. It's gorgeous. If you want to, Annika, can you share my email maybe? Oh, I can put it in here. Because I'm happy to send you information on it. It's supposed to be coming up on our website soon, but we're having issues with our marketplace store for the museum. But absolutely, David and I just spoke at College Art Association in New York City. I ran a panel on collaboration as a catalyst to support wellness, and emotional health. Well, through museum programming.
Oh, we spoke at CAA, yeah.
Yeah, and so so I think it's interesting because at CAA we talked a lot about the exhibition, the catalog, and we had not yet talked about our experience at Oxford. So I agree. I see how all of these things are inextricably linked, really. So, yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you, everyone, coming in. Feel free to forward any additional questions.
Yeah,
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you both. Before we go, we'll have 5 more talks in this series throughout 2023. So please be on the lookout, everyone. And thank you, and enjoy the rest of your
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
That was so great.